The red Kenworth semi-truck turned off County Road 14 onto the gravel drive at exactly 3:07 in the afternoon on April 18, 1978. The driver, Mike Sorensen, had made this delivery route 17 times before. He knew every pothole in that quarter-mile stretch between the county road and the white farmhouse. He knew the tunnel of oak trees that filtered the afternoon sun into dancing shadows across his windshield. He knew the farm belonged to Constance Sullivan, a 73-year-old widow who'd been working this land longer than Mike had been alive. What Mike Sorensen didn't know was that he was about to become a central figure in a story that would echo through Marshall County, Iowa for the next 3 decades. A story about two John Deere tractors that would never be unloaded, about $85,000 in debt that would never touch the soil of Willow Creek Farm, about a mother's love that looked like cruelty and a daughter's ambition that looked like wisdom, and how sometimes the hardest thing you can do for someone you love is stand in their way and refuse to move. The tractors gleamed in the April sun, brand new John Deere 4440 and 4240, green and yellow paint so fresh you could still smell it over the diesel fumes. Combined value $85,000 before tax and interest. Monthly payment $1,100 for the next 10 years. Total cost with interest $97,300. Mike downshifted as he approached the farmhouse. The engine's rumble echoed off the barn walls. In the distance, he could see someone working in the vegetable garden beside the house. An older woman in faded jeans and a blue work shirt, gray hair pulled back in a bun. She straightened up, one hand on her lower back, and turned to look at the approaching truck. Then she did something Mike had never seen in 17 years of hauling farm equipment. She walked to the middle of the gravel drive about 300 yards from where the county road met the farm entrance, and she stopped. Just stopped. Stood there with her feet planted, shoulder-width apart, and raised one hand like a traffic cop. Mike's foot went to the brake. The air brakes hissed. The truck shuddered to a stop 50 feet from where Constance Sullivan stood, and in that moment, everything changed. But to understand why Constance Sullivan was standing in that road, why she was willing to humiliate her daughter in front of the whole county, why she was prepared to turn away $85,000 worth of modern farming equipment that her family desperately needed, you have to go back 8 months. Back to Thanksgiving Day, 1977, when the first seed of this confrontation was planted over turkey and cranberry sauce in that same white farmhouse. The Sullivan family Thanksgiving dinner had 43 people crammed into a farmhouse built for 12. 3 folding tables lined it up end to end in the living room, kids relegated to card tables in the kitchen, the smell of roasting turkey and fresh-baked pies thick enough to taste. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows, carrying the first hint of the hard winter that was coming. Inside, the house hummed with conversation and laughter, and the particular chaos that comes when 3 generations try to occupy the same space. Constance Sullivan moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, refilling coffee cups and checking on dishes and making sure everyone had enough to eat, even though there was enough food on those tables to feed 60. At 72, she moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose knees ached in cold weather, but whose mind was sharp as ever. Her dress was simple dark blue cotton that she'd owned for 5 years. Her only jewelry was a thin gold wedding band that she hadn't removed since Walter slipped it on her finger in 1927. Her daughter, Lorraine Sullivan, everyone called her Rainey, sat 3 chairs down next to her husband, Garrett. Rainey was 34 with dark hair cut sensibly short and hands that bore the calluses of someone who worked. She wore a dress she'd sewn herself forest green cotton with a lace collar, and if you looked closely, you could see where she'd mended a small tear near the hem. Next to Garrett sat their 2 children, Olivia, 8 years old with her mother's dark eyes, and Beckett, 5, who couldn't sit still for more than 30 seconds at a time. Rainey had parked her truck at the far end of the driveway, hoping it wouldn't be quite so visible. A 1965 Ford F-100 forest green paint faded to something closer to gray-green, a spiderweb crack in the passenger side of the windshield that Garrett kept saying he'd fix. The truck ran perfectly. Constance had bought it cash in 1970 for $800 from a farmer whose wife wanted something newer. 13 years later, it still started every morning, still hauled everything they needed it to haul, still got them from point A to point B without complaint. But it wasn't new. And in 1977, in certain circles, that mattered. The rumble started about 2:30 in the afternoon, just as Constance was bringing out the pumpkin pies. A deep, throaty diesel engine sound that you could feel in your chest before you heard it with your ears. Conversation faltered. Heads turned toward the windows. Darlene Holloway had arrived. The John Deere 4440 that rolled up the driveway wasn't just a tractor. It was a statement. 130 horsepower of turbocharged diesel engine, power shift transmission, enclosed cab with air conditioning and a stereo radio. It was painted in John Deere's signature green and yellow, so new the paint practically glowed in the November afternoon. Darlene sat in that cab like a queen on a throne, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, one hand draped casually over the steering wheel. She let the engine idle for a full 5 minutes before shutting it down, making sure everyone saw it, making sure everyone heard it, making sure everyone knew that Darlene and Clayton Holloway were farming with the best equipment money could buy. Well, money could borrow anyway. The 4440 and its smaller companion, the 4240, had cost them $79,000 financed over 10 years at 9.75% interest. They'd made 8 payments so far. $72,000 left to go. Darlene climbed down from the barn in stages, taking her time smoothing her dress, a burgundy number, with a designer label that cost more than Rainey's entire wardrobe. Her husband, Clayton, followed quieter, less performative, the kind of man who'd learned it was easier to go along with his wife's theatrics than to fight them. "Well, look at that," someone said near the window. "Brand new 4440. Must have cost a fortune." "Clayton's doing real well," someone else added. "Smart farmer, that one. Knows you got to spend money to make money." Rainey felt her face grow hot. She glanced toward the end of the driveway where her 1965 Ford sat, suddenly looking even older and shabbier by comparison. Garrett reached under the table and squeezed her hand, but it didn't help much. Darlene swept into the house, bringing cold air and expensive perfume with her, her eyes scanning the room the way a general might survey a battlefield. "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Sorry we're late. Had to finish up some work with the new equipment. You know how it is." She knew exactly where Rainey was sitting, made a beeline straight for her. "Rainey, happy Thanksgiving, honey." The hug was brief, performative, the kind where you don't actually make contact. "How are you and Garrett? And these precious babies?" "We're good, Darlene. You?" "Oh, we're blessed, just blessed. Though I tell you, farming gets more complicated every year. If we didn't have the new equipment, I don't know how we'd manage. Speaking of which," she gestured toward the window where the 4440 was visible, still commanding attention even powered down. "Did you see what we just got in? Clayton finally convinced me we needed to upgrade. I was nervous about the investment, but honestly, Rainey, the efficiency gains alone have already paid for themselves." This was a lie, but Rainey didn't know that yet. The efficiency gains had been marginal at best. The real difference was that Darlene and Clayton could cover the same ground in less time, which mostly just meant Clayton had more hours to worry about whether they could make the payments. "That's great, Darlene, really great. What are you all driving these days? I don't think I saw your truck out there." "It's at the end of the drive, the 65 Ford." Darlene's face did something complicated. Not quite a smirk, not quite pity. Something in between that was somehow worse than either. "The F-100, bless your heart, that truck is still running. I remember when Constance bought that thing. What's that been, 7 years, 8? 13, runs perfect." "Well, that's good. That's real good. Waste not, want not, right." Darlene's voice had risen just slightly enough that the conversations at nearby seats had started to fade, people tuning into this exchange. "Though I will say, honey, if you and Garrett ever want to upgrade to something from this decade, Clayton knows a great dealer. Rick Holloway, actually, that's Clayton's brother. He could get you a real good deal on a newer truck. Can't have people thinking the Sullivans can't afford decent transportation, right?" The room had gone almost silent now. 43 people suddenly very interested in their plates, their coffee cups anywhere but the conversation happening at the center table. But listening, everyone listening. Rainey's throat felt tight. "The Ford works fine for us." "I'm sure it does, honey. I'm sure it does. Just saying, times change. Farming's a business now, not a hobby. Got to look the part if you want to be taken seriously." Darlene patted Rainey's shoulder, the gesture somehow more condescending than comforting. "Anyway, I should go say hi to Constance. Where's your mama?" Constance had been standing in the kitchen doorway for the last 2 minutes, holding a coffee pot, watching this entire exchange, with eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything anymore. When Darlene looked her way, Constance's face was carefully neutral, but her knuckles on the coffee pot handle were white. "Darlene," Constance said evenly. "Coffee? Oh, I'd love some, thank you." Darlene swept toward the kitchen, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and uncomfortable silence behind her. Rainey looked down at her plate. The turkey she'd been enjoying 5 minutes ago might as well have been cardboard. Across the table, her daughter Olivia looked confused, picking up on the tension without understanding it. Beckett, mercifully oblivious, was more interested in seeing how many green beans he could balance on his fork. Garrett leaned close, his voice barely a whisper. Don't listen to her. The truck's fine. But it wasn't fine. Not anymore. Because it wasn't really about the truck, was it? It was about what the truck represented. Old, behind the times, poor, unsuccessful. After dinner, after the peas, after the coffee and the small talk, and the gradual dispersal of family members back to their own homes, Rainey found her mother in the kitchen washing dishes. The window over the sink looked out toward the barn and the fields beyond dormant, now under the gray November sky. Constance's hands moved in the soapy water with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd washed 10,000 loads of dishes in this sink. Mama, do you think we look poor? Constance's hands stopped. She looked at her daughter's reflection in the dark window. Who told you that? Nobody told me. I'm asking. Constance rinsed a plate, set it in the drying rack. We're not poor. We own 640 acres of prime Iowa farmland, free and clear. We've got equipment that works. We've got a roof over our heads and food on the table and money in the bank. That's not poor, Rainey. That's blessed. But the truck runs. It's 13 years old, I don't know. So I've got a cast iron skillet that's 50 years old, still cooks eggs just fine. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? Constance turned from the sink, drying her hands on a dish towel. Baby, let me tell you something. Darlene and Clayton are driving $47,000 worth of tractor that they don't own. The bank owns it. They're paying interest on top of the purchase price. So by the time they're done, that tractor will have cost them $60,000, maybe more. And in 10 years when it's paid off, it'll be worth maybe $20,000 if they're lucky. So they'll have spent $60,000 to own something worth $20,000. You tell me who's poor. But everyone thinks. I don't give a damn what everyone thinks, and neither should you. Constance's voice was sharp now, sharper than usual. Your father spent the last years of his life worried about what everyone thought, about keeping up, about looking successful. You know where it got him? A heart attack at 52 years old, dead in a hospital bed, holding my hand, apologizing for the debt he was leaving me with. This was the most Constance had ever said about Walter's death. Rainey stood very still, afraid that if she moved, her mother would stop talking. We had a truck payment. Constance continued, her voice quieter now but no less intense. Just one. A Ford pickup he bought new in '73 for $8,500. 7-year loan, $120 monthly payment. Doesn't sound like much, does it? But that was 1973. Then the crop prices dropped in '74. Then the inputs went up. Then your father started cutting corners, trying to make the payment. Started skipping his blood pressure medication because it costed $12 a month. $12. And one morning he woke up with chest pains, and by noon he was gone. Rainey felt tears building behind her eyes. Mama, I didn't know. I'm telling you now because I need you to understand something. Debt doesn't care if you're tired, doesn't care if it's a bad year, doesn't care if you're sick or scared or struggling. It just sits there month after month demanding its pound of flesh. And I will be damned if I watch you sign up for that. Not while I'm alive. Not ever. The kitchen was silent except for the drip of the faucet and the distant sound of Garrett loading the kids into the truck outside. The Ford runs fine, Constance said finally. And if anyone in this family tells you different, you send them to me. But when Rainey climbed into that old Ford that evening, when she turned the key and heard the engine cough to life, when she drove past Darlene's gleaming John Deere, still parked prominently near the barn, she felt something shift inside her. Something that felt like shame mixing with resentment, mixing with a burning desire to prove that she was just as capable, just as successful, just as modern as anyone else. That feeling was dangerous. More dangerous than she knew. Christmas came and went. The winter of '77 into '78 was brutal, the kind that old-timers would reference for years afterward. Temperatures below zero for weeks at a time. Wind that screamed across the frozen fields and found every gap in every wall. The kind of winter that made you question why anyone had ever thought Iowa was a good place to build a civilization. Rainey spent more time than usual in town that winter. At the co-op where she worked part-time keeping books. At the feed store. At the diner on Main Street where farmers gathered for coffee and gossip and the kind of casual conversation that shapes a community. And everywhere she went, she heard the same message, variations on the same theme. Modern farming requires modern equipment. You can't compete with a 40-year-old tractor. Got to spend money to make money. Look at the Holloways, they're doing it right. The John Deere dealer in town was run by Rick Holloway, Clayton's younger brother, a man with slicked back hair and a smile that showed too many teeth. He had a gift for making debt sound like opportunity, for making restraint sound like cowardice. His showroom on Main Street featured a brand new 4440, just like Darlene's Spotlight's position, so the green and yellow paint practically glowed with promise. Rainey found herself driving past that dealership more often than she needed to, slowing down, looking, imagining. On a cold Tuesday in early January, she pulled into the parking lot. Just to look, she told herself, just to get some information. Rick's smile when she walked through the door was warm as summer. Rainey Sullivan, what brings you in on this fine cold day? Just looking. Best kind of customer. Come on, let me show you what we got. He walked her through the showroom like a curator showing off art. The 4440 with its 130 horsepower, its climate-controlled cab, its modern hydraulics. The 4240 slightly smaller, but still a massive upgrade over anything the Sullivan farm currently owned. He showed her specification sheets and performance data and testimonials from satisfied customers. Your mama's still running that old 4010? Rick asked, though he already knew the answer. 60 model, plus a 65 4020. Rick made a sound somewhere between sympathy and disgust. 20 years old minimum. That's not farming, Rainey. That's archaeology. How much time you lose to breakdowns? How much fuel you waste with those old engines? How much ground could you cover with something modern? They run fine. Sure they do, until they don't. And when that 4010 finally dies in Rainey, it will die probably right in the middle of planting season. What's your plan? You going to be scrambling around trying to find parts for a 40-year-old tractor while your neighbors are finishing up their fields? He let that sink in, then hit her with the closer. I can get you into both of these machines. Both, the 4440 and the 4240. Package deal, $85,000 total, 10-year financing at 9.5%. Monthly payment works out to about $1,100. You're farming 640, right? 640 acres. Rainey nodded, caught off guard by how quickly he'd done the math. At 115 bushels per acre conservative estimate, you'll probably do better with this equipment at current corn prices around $220 per bushel. You're looking at gross revenue of $165,000, give or take. Operating costs, what, at 80 grand? That leaves you 85 before the equipment payment. You make the payment, you still clear 69,000. And that's a bad year. The numbers made sense. In the warm showroom with the gleaming tractors and Rick's confident voice, the numbers made perfect sense. Let me talk to my husband, Rainey said. Absolutely. Smart woman. Talk to Garrett. Run the numbers yourself. But Rainey, Rick's voice dropped, became almost confidential. Between you and me, your mama's way of farming, that worked in her generation. But it's 1978. Times have changed. You want to be competitive, you got to think like a business person, not a homesteader. And sometimes that means making decisions that your parents' generation might not understand. Rainey drove home in the old Ford Ricks, words echoing in her head. When she pulled into the drive and saw her mother's farmhouse solid and paid for, she felt a complicated mix of love and frustration. Constance had built something remarkable here, something secure and stable, and debt-free. But was it enough? Was security the same thing as success? That night, after the kids were asleep, Rainey and Garrett sat at their kitchen table with a calculator and a notepad. Garrett was quieter than his wife, more cautious, but even he couldn't argue with the numbers. It's a lot of money, he said finally. It's an investment. Your mama won't approve. Mama's still farming like it's 1940. The world's changed. Garrett looked at his wife, saw something in her eyes he didn't quite recognize. A hunger, maybe. An ambition that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had always been there, just waiting for the right excuse to emerge. What do you want to do? He asked. And that was the question, wasn't it? What did Rainey want? She wanted to stop being embarrassed at family gatherings. Wanted to stop making excuses for old equipment and old trucks. Wanted to walk into the co-op and have people nod with respect instead of pity. Wanted her daughter to be proud of her family's farm instead of quietly ashamed. I want to call Rick tomorrow, she said. Set up the financing. Order the tractors. Without telling your mama. I'll tell her. Just after they're ordered, after it's done. That should have been Garrett's moment to object, to point out how dishonest that was, how it violated the trust between mother and daughter, how starting a major financial commitment with deception was probably a bad omen. But Garrett was tired of being poor too, or at least of feeling poor, and sometimes it's easier to go along and to be the voice of caution. Okay, he said, if you're sure. Rainey nodded, though she wasn't sure of anything except that she couldn't keep living like this. Couldn't keep driving past Rick's showroom and feeling that gnaw of inadequacy. On January 15, 1978, Lorraine Marie Sullivan walked into Holloway Implement and signed a financing agreement for $85,000, delivery date April 18th, destination Willow Creek Farm, care of Constance Sullivan. She didn't tell her mother, not that day, not that week, not that month. The secret sat inside her like something alive, growing heavier with each passing day. The contract sat in Rainey's dresser drawer, tucked beneath folded sweaters where Constance would never think to look. 8 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple transaction. Holloway Implement would deliver 2 John Deere tractors on April 18th, and for the next 10 years, Lorraine Sullivan would owe First Federal Bank of Marshall County $1,100 every single month. No exceptions, no mercy. Just that relentless monthly demand that would arrive as regular as the seasons. She'd signed it with a ballpoint pen in Rick Holloway's office, her hand only shaking slightly. The deposit, $2,000 from the emergency fund she and Garrett had been building for 3 years, had been paid by check. Rick had smiled his salesman smile and shook her hand and told her she was making a very smart business decision, that she was thinking like a modern farmer, that her mother would understand eventually once she saw how much more efficient the operation could be. Rainey wanted to believe him. Some days she did believe him. Other days when she woke at 3 in the morning with her heart racing and couldn't quite remember why, she wasn't so sure. The winter dragged on. February in Iowa is a test of character, a month that seems to last 3 times longer than the calendar suggests. The fields lay frozen under a blanket of dirty snow. The equipment sat idle in barns waiting for spring. And farmers had nothing to do but drink coffee, gossip, and think about all the things that could go wrong in the season ahead. Constance spent her days the way she always did, reading, mending, planting the garden she'd plant once the ground thawed. On warmer afternoons, she'd bundle up and walk the fence lines, checking for damage from the winter storms, looking over her land with the careful attention of someone who'd fought for every acre. She'd paid off the last of the mortgage in 1962, 16 years ago now. The deed was in a safe deposit box in town, her name and her name alone on the title. 640 acres that belonged to no bank, no lender, no one but Constance Sullivan. At night, sometimes when the wind howled across the frozen fields and rattled the farmhouse windows, Constance would sit in Walter's old chair by the fireplace and remember. Not pleasant memories, the kind that come whether you want them or not. It was a Thursday evening in late February when Reverend Pemberton stopped by for coffee. Thomas Pemberton was 78, had been pastor at Willow Creek Methodist for 43 years, had presided over Walter's funeral, and probably half the funerals in Marshall County. He was the kind of man people told their secrets to, though he never repeated them. They sat in Constance's kitchen with coffee and store-bought cookies she'd stopped baking much since Walter died, and talked about the usual things. The weather, the upcoming church bazaar, the Hendersons' new grandbaby. But Reverend Pemberton hadn't driven out in February cold just for small talk. "How's Rainey doing?" he asked finally. Constance's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "Fine, far as I know. Why, saw her truck at Holloway Implement a few weeks back. 3 different times, actually. Just wondered if everything was all right with the equipment." The air in the kitchen changed. Constance set her cup down very carefully. "The equipment's fine." "I'm sure it is. Just seemed odd her spending that much time at a dealership when there's nothing wrong." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the wind pushed against the house like something trying to get in. "I haven't told many people this," Constance said finally, "about Walter, about how he really died." "You don't have to." "No, I think maybe I do." She refilled both their cups, though neither of them had finished the first. Her hands wrapped around the coffee cup as if drawing strength from its warmth. March of '73, Walter came home with a Ford pickup. Brand new, still had the dealer plates on it. Red paint so shiny you could see your reflection. He was proud as a peacock, showing it off to Rainey and the grandkids. She paused, gathering herself. $8,500. He'd financed the whole thing. 7 years at 8.2% interest. Monthly payment was $120. Now, Thomas, you got to understand that doesn't sound like much. $120. We were clearing $30,000–40,000 a year farming 600 acres. $120 should have been nothing. But it wasn't, Reverend Pemberton said quietly. No, it wasn't, because '73 was a good year, but '74 wasn't. Corn prices dropped. Inputs went up. Fuel costs damn near doubled. And that $120 payment, it started feeling like a millstone around our necks. We'd have a bad month and I'd say, Walter, maybe we should sell the truck, go back to the old one. And he'd say no. He'd say people is watching. He'd say we can't look like we're struggling. He'd say it's just temporary. Next year will be better. Her voice had gone flat the way voices do when you're trying to keep emotion at bay. He started cutting corners. Little things at first, generic parts instead of OEM, cheaper seed. He stopped taking his blood pressure medication because it was $12 a month at the pharmacy and we needed every dollar for the payment. $12, Thomas. He died over $12 a month. Connie, June 7th, 1975. Wednesday morning, I was making breakfast and he came in from checking the cattle and said his chest felt tight. I told him to sit down, I'd call the doctor. He said no, it was just heartburn. He'd be fine. 20 minutes later, he was on the floor. Ambulance took 45 minutes to get out here. He died in the back of it, holding my hand saying, I'm sorry, Connie. I'm sorry about the truck. Constance looked up at the Reverend, her eyes dry but fierce. Those were his last words. Not I love you, not take care of Rainey. I'm sorry about the truck. Because that truck, that stupid, unnecessary truck that we didn't need, that was just about keeping up appearances, that's what killed him. The stress of it, the constant worry, the shame of almost missing payments, that $120 noose that hung around his neck every single month for 2 years. You sold it after, Reverend Pemberton said. Not a question. Sold it the same week, got $6,000 for it, still owed $7,000, had to use savings to cover the difference. So that truck cost us $9,500 total, and my husband's life on top of it. The kitchen was silent except for the electric hum of the refrigerator and the wind against the windows. I made a promise at Walter's graveside, Constance continued, that I would never, never let debt touch this farm again, and that I would do everything in my power to make sure Rainey didn't walk down the same road, even if she hates me for it, even if the whole county thinks I'm a crazy old woman. I will not watch my daughter kill herself the way her father did. Have you talked to her about the dealership? Not yet, but I will. Constance began clearing the coffee cups. I will. After Reverend Pemberton left, Constance stood at her kitchen window and looked out at the dark fields, the barns silhouetted against the winter sky. Somewhere out there, buried under the frozen ground, Walter was sleeping his permanent sleep. And somewhere in town, her daughter was making decisions that might lead her down the same path. Over my dead body, Constance thought. Over my dead body. The harassment started small, the way these things always do. It was a Sunday in early March, the first truly warm day of the year, when Rainey encountered Darlene at church. Willow Creek Methodist sat on the edge of town, white clapboard, with a tall steeple, the kind of church that had anchored the community for 100 years. The parking lot was gravel, and when Darlene pulled in driving Clayton's new Chevrolet Silverado, another recent purchase, another monthly payment, she made sure to park right next to Rainey's old Ford. Inside, during coffee hour after the service, Darlene held court near the dessert table. Clayton's got us looking at a new planter, she was saying to a small crowd of women. 24-row fully automated. The dealer says it'll cut our planting time in half. Of course it's an investment, but you know what they say, you've got to spend money to make money. She said this last part a little louder just as Rainey walked past with Olivia and Beckett in tow. Oh, Rainey, I didn't see you there. How's your equipment holding up, still using Constance's old machinery? Every conversation in the vicinity paused. That particular frequency of polite interest that means everyone's listening, even though they're pretending not to. It's fine, Rainey said. Works just fine. Well, that's good. That's real good. I just worry, with equipment that old. What happens when something breaks? Can you even get parts for a 1960 tractor anymore? We manage. I'm sure you do, honey. I'm sure you do. Darlene took a sip of her coffee, smiled over the rim. Clayton says the old-timers did amazing things with ancient equipment. Real pioneer spirit. Of course, we're living in 1978, not 1948, but I guess if it works for you. Olivia tugged on Rainey's sleeve. Mama, can we go? In a minute, baby. It's just I'd hate to see you lose out on yields because you're trying to cover ground with underpowered equipment. Every bushel counts, right? Darlene's smile was all teeth and no warmth. But I'm sure your mama knows what she's doing. She's been farming longer than most of us have been alive. Martha Henderson, standing nearby, felt compelled to add, my husband says Constance Sullivan is the smartest farmer in 3 counties. Says she could teach classes on management. Oh, absolutely, Darlene agreed quickly. She's wonderful. Just from a different era. Different ways of thinking. Nothing wrong with that. Some people prefer the traditional approach. Rainey felt heat climbing her neck, her face. She wanted to defend her mother, defend their operation, defend their choices. But she couldn't, could she? Because deep down in a place she didn't want to examine too closely, part of her agreed with Darlene. Part of her was embarrassed by the old equipment, the old truck, the whole aesthetic of making do that defined the Sullivan farm. We should go, she said to her children. Get home for lunch. As they walked to the parking lot, Beckett asked, Mama, why was that lady being mean? She wasn't being mean, honey. She was just talking. But Olivia, 8 years old and already learning to read between lines, said quietly, she was being mean. I didn't like it. Neither did Rainey. But what could she do about it? The contract was signed. The tractors were ordered. In 6 weeks, everything would change. The second incident happened at the co-op on a Thursday afternoon. Rainey had stopped in to pick up a 50-pound bag of chicken feed, something she did every few weeks. The co-op was the beating heart of the farming community, a sprawling metal building that sold everything from seed corn to work boots, where farmers gathered to talk shop and compare notes and argue about politics. Darlene was at the counter writing a check for what looked like a substantial order of fertilizer and chemicals. $400 worth according to the receipt the clerk was processing. Rainey, twice in 1 week, were practically neighbors. Rainey hefted her bag of chicken feed onto the counter. $18. The contrast wasn't lost on either of them. Just getting the essentials, Rainey said. Smart, no point in overspending. Darlene signed her check with a flourish. Though I will say Clayton's agronomist convinced us to go with the premium fertilizer package this year. Says we could see yield increases of 15-20 bushels per acre. That's real money when you're talking 640 acres. We do fine with our yields. I'm sure you do, though you know fine and optimal aren't quite the same thing, are they? Darlene picked up her receipt, tucked it into her purse. Of course, to really optimize, you need the equipment to apply inputs precisely. GPS guidance, variable rate technology, all that modern stuff. But that requires, modern equipment. The clerk, a young man named Danny who'd graduated high school with Rainey, was trying very hard to pretend he wasn't listening while listening to every word. We'll get by, Rainey said. Of course you will. The Sullivan way, right? Make it work with what you've got. There's something admirable about that. Old-fashioned maybe, but admirable. Darlene headed for the door, then turned back. Oh, Rainey, Clayton mentioned he saw your mama in town the other day. Is she doing okay at her age, I mean? She's got to be, 73 now. She's fine. Well, that's good. I just wonder sometimes about her still trying to manage a farm that size at her age. If something happened to her, would you and Garrett even know where to start? With the old equipment and the old methods and everything? It was a calculated strike, and it landed perfectly. Because that was exactly what worried Rainey. What if something did happen to Constance? What if they suddenly had to take over the full operation with equipment they barely understood, equipment that was held together with baling wire and prayer? After Darlene left, Danny the clerk said quietly, for what it's worth, Mrs. Sullivan, your mama's equipment runs better than half the new stuff that comes through here. I've seen those old John Deeres. They're built like tanks. Rainey smiled, thanked him, paid for her chicken feed, but the seed of doubt Darlene had planted was growing. The third incident was at Olivia's school, parent-teacher conferences in mid-March, where Rainey sat in a too-small chair across from Mrs. Patterson, Olivia's third-grade teacher. Olivia's doing wonderfully in math, Mrs. Patterson was saying. Reading strong, too. She's a bright girl, very conscientious. We're proud of her. There was one small thing. Mrs. Patterson's voice took on that particular tone teachers use when they're about to tell you something uncomfortable. Last week during free time, some of the children were talking about their family's farms. You know how it is in a rural community, farming is what most of these kids know. And one of the other students, I won't say, who made a comment about old equipment, about how some farms were stuck in the past. Rainey felt her stomach tighten. What did Olivia say? She got very quiet, and later during art time, I found her crying in the bathroom. When I asked what was wrong, she said she was embarrassed about your family's farm, that the other kids thought you were poor. The fluorescent lights in the classroom suddenly seemed too bright. Rainey's hands gripped the edge of the small desk. We're not poor. I know that, you know that, but 8-year-olds don't always understand the difference between appearing wealthy and being financially secure. They just know new versus old, shiny versus worn. Mrs. Patterson's face was kind but concerned. I wanted you to know so you could talk to her, reassure her. She seems to carry a lot of worry for such a young child. On the drive home, Olivia sat quietly in the passenger seat of the old Ford, looking out the window at the passing fields. Mrs. Patterson told me what happened, Rainey said finally. About what the other kids said. Olivia didn't respond. Honey, we're not poor. We're actually doing really well. Better than a lot of families. Then why do we have the oldest truck in the parking lot? Because it runs fine. Because we don't need a new one. Sarah's family got a new car, and the Hendersons got a new tractor, and Darlene has all new stuff. Olivia's voice was small, miserable. Why can't we have new things? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that new things often come with invisible chains, that the shiny tractor in the neighbor's field might be the rope around the neighbor's neck, that appearances lie constantly and convincingly? We're going to, Rainey heard herself say, we're getting new equipment. This spring, 2 brand new tractors. Olivia looked at her mother, hope blooming on her face. Really? Really? And there it was, the moment when the secret stopped being just about Rainey's pride and became about her daughter's happiness. When the debt stopped being a financial decision and became wrapped up in love and protection and the desperate desire to give your child a better life than you had. The contract in Rainey's dresser drawer seemed to gain weight after that conversation. Every time she walked past it, she felt it there like a presence in the room. April arrived with the reluctant warmth of an Iowa spring. The snow melted, turning fields into mud that would eventually become workable soil. Farmers began preparing for the season ahead, servicing equipment, ordering seed, checking fences, doing the 1,000 small tasks that farming required. Rainey and Garrett had told themselves they'd tell Constance about the tractors before delivery. They'd planned the conversation a dozen times, rehearsed the arguments, the efficiency gains, the modern farming methods, the necessity of staying competitive. The financing was manageable, the decision was made, and really, Mama, this is the way farming works now. But the right moment never came, or rather, every moment felt wrong. And so the days slipped by, and the conversation didn't happen, and the delivery date crept closer like a deadline in a dream. April 15th, a Saturday. Rainey was in the garden with Constance, helping plant early peas when the phone rang inside the house. Constance went to answer it, and Rainey heard her voice through the open window. Hello. Yes, this is Constance Sullivan. What? No, I haven't ordered anything from Holloway Implement. There must be some mistake. Rainey's heart stopped. She stood up so fast she knocked over the seed packet. But then Constance's voice changed. Oh, I see. Yes, Rainey lives here. Well, technically the farm address is mine, but yes, she and Garrett farm the land. What is this about? Rainey was already moving toward the house. Tuesday the 18th, I see. And what exactly are you delivering? A long pause. 2 tractors, $85,000. I see. When Rainey burst through the door, Constance was standing by the phone receiver, still in her hand, her face completely unreadable. Who was that? Rainey asked, though she already knew. Rick Holloway says he's delivering 2 John Deere tractors here on Tuesday at 3 p.m. Says you ordered them. Says the financing has already been approved and the deposits have been paid. The kitchen suddenly felt very small, very hot. Rainey's mouth was dry. Mama, I was going to tell you. Oh, how long ago? What? How long ago did you order them? January. Constance set the phone down with exaggerated care, the way you handle something fragile when you really want to throw it against the wall. January, 4 months ago. You've been lying to me for 4 months. I wasn't lying. I just didn't know how to tell you. Because you knew I'd say no. Because I knew you wouldn't understand. The words came out louder than Rainey intended. Constance's eyes narrowed. Wouldn't understand what exactly wouldn't understand? Putting $85,000 of debt on a farm that's been paid off for 16 years. Wouldn't understand signing up for $1,100 a month in payments when we're one bad crop away from disaster. What exactly am I not understanding, Rainey? That farming has changed, that we can't compete with 40-year-old equipment, that I'm tired of being the joke of the county, tired of driving past Darlene's new tractors and hearing people talk about how the Sullivans are stuck in the past. So this is about Darlene, about what people think. It's about survival. Mama, it's about staying relevant. It's about pride. Constance's voice cut through Rainey's arguments like a knife. It's about you being embarrassed. And you know what, I understand that. I do. But Rainey, listen to me. Pride is expensive. It'll cost you everything if you let it. The decision's already made. The contract's signed. Then unsign it. Call Rick Monday morning and cancel the order. I can't. I put down a $2,000 deposit. It's non-refundable. Constance's face went very still. You spent $2,000 of your savings without telling me. It's my money. To commit to $83,000 more dollars of debt, it's my decision. On my land. They stood facing each other across the kitchen, two generations of Sullivan women, two completely different philosophies of farming and life. Outside, the April wind pushed new leaves around the yard. Inside, something fundamental was breaking. I want you to call Rick Holloway, Constance said, her voice low and controlled. I want you to cancel that order. And if you've already lost the deposit, fine. That's the price of a lesson learned. But those tractors are not coming on this property. It's too late. They're scheduled for delivery Tuesday. Then tell them to deliver somewhere else, because they're not welcome here. Rainey felt tears of frustration building. You can't do that. The delivery address is this farm. It's all been arranged. The delivery address is my property, and I can refuse delivery of anything I want. You wouldn't. Constance looked at her daughter with eyes that had seen the Great Depression, had watched a husband die of debt-induced stress, had built an empire from nothing through sheer force of will and careful management. Try me, she said. Rainey grabbed her jacket and stormed out. She drove the old Ford into town, hands shaking on the steering wheel, tears blurring her vision. She parked outside Holloway Implement and sat there for 20 minutes trying to decide what to do. Call Rick, cancel the order, lose the deposit but save the relationship with her mother, or let the delivery happen. Let Constance see the tractors. Let her understand that this was happening whether she approved or not. Pride whispered that Constance would come around once she saw the equipment, that she was being stubborn and old-fashioned, and once the tractors were actually there working the fields proving their worth, she'd understand. Pride is a liar. Rainey drove home without going into the dealership. Monday came and went. She didn't call Rick, didn't cancel the order. Just let the momentum of the decision carry her forward, because stopping would mean admitting she'd been wrong, and she wasn't ready for that yet. Tuesday morning, April 18th. Rainey woke at 5 a.m. with her heart pounding. The delivery was scheduled for 3 p.m. She had 10 hours to decide what to do. 10 hours to be brave enough to cancel. 10 hours to prevent what was about to become a disaster. She spent those 10 hours at work at the co-op trying to focus on inventory spreadsheets while her mind raced through scenarios. Maybe Constance would be out when the truck arrived. Maybe Garrett could intercept the delivery. Maybe somehow this would all work out. At 2:30, she called home. No answer. Constance was probably outside working in the garden doing the 100 things that needed doing on a farm in spring. At 2:45, she called Rick Holloway. Rick, about the delivery today. All set. Mike's probably pulling onto County Road 14 right now. Should be at your place by 3:05 latest. You're gonna love these machines, Rainey. Best decision you ever made. Actually, I need to... Hey, I got another call coming in. See you soon. The line went dead. Rainey stood in the co-op office, phone in hand, paralyzed by indecision. She could drive home, could get there before the truck, could at least be present for whatever was about to happen. Or she could stay here. Let the delivery happen without her. Let Garrett handle it. Let the momentum of the decision carry forward without her having to watch. She chose the coward's option. She stayed at work. At 3:07 p.m., Mike Sorensen's red Kenworth semi-truck turned off County Road 14 onto the gravel drive of Willow Creek Farm. And Constance Sullivan, who had been working in her garden and had seen the truck approaching from a quarter-mile away, set down her hoe, brushed the dirt off her hands, and walked to the middle of that gravel drive. When the phone rang at the co-op at 3:25, Rainey knew before she answered it what had happened. Some disasters announce themselves with silence before the actual news arrives. Mrs. Sullivan, it was Mike Sorensen, the driver. You need to get home. Now. What happened? Your mother, she won't let me deliver the tractors. She's standing in the middle of the road and she won't move. Rainey's hands went cold. Put her on the phone. She won't come to the phone. She says if you want to talk, you can come here and talk face to face. Ma'am, I've got $85,000 worth of equipment on this truck and I'm burning daylight. You need to handle this. Rainey hung up. For 10 seconds, she stood frozen in the co-op office, staring at the wall calendar that showed April 18th circled in red. The delivery date she'd marked 3 months ago with such certainty, such confidence, that this was the right decision. Then she grabbed her keys and ran. The drive from town to Willow Creek Farm was 7 miles. Rainey made it in 9 minutes, the old Ford's engine screaming in a way it hadn't since the day she'd learned to drive. The speedometer needle touched 70 on the straightaways, 50 through the curves, gravel pinging against the undercarriage like buckshot. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles went white, and in her chest something felt like it was tearing loose. She saw the truck from a quarter-mile out. The red Kenworth semi was impossible to miss, sitting there on the gravel drive like a beached ship. As she got closer, she could make out the two John Deere tractors strapped to the flatbed trailer, their green and yellow paint gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Beautiful machines, modern, efficient, everything she dreamed about for 4 months. And standing in the road between the semi and the farmhouse, arms at her sides, feet planted like she was rooted to the earth itself, was Constance Sullivan. Rainey pulled the Ford to a stop at the end of the drive where it met County Road 14. 4 other vehicles were already there. Garrett's pickup, Rick Holloway's dealership truck, a silver sedan she didn't recognize, and Clayton Holloway's new Silverado, which meant Darlene was somewhere nearby, probably watching with that particular expression of schadenfreude she wore so well. Rainey got out. Her legs felt unsteady, like the ground was moving beneath her feet. The April wind carried the smell of fresh-turned earth and diesel fumes and something else, something that might have been the scent of disaster unfolding. Mike Sorensen, the driver, was leaning against the cab of his truck, smoking a cigarette with the desperate intensity of a man who'd wandered into a family drama he wanted no part of. When he saw Rainey, he straightened up. "Mrs. Sullivan, thank God. Can you please talk some sense into your mother?" But Rainey wasn't looking at Mike. She was looking at the tableau spread out along that gravel drive, at all the players in this unfolding tragedy taking their positions. Garrett stood about 20 feet from Constance, his face pale, hands in his pockets. He caught Rainey's eye and shook his head slightly, a gesture that said, "I tried and failed, and I don't know what to do now." Rick Holloway was closer to the truck, talking on a CB radio, probably to his office, trying to figure out the legal ramifications of a delivery being refused. And they're parked just off to the side near the oak tree that marked the edge of the property were Clayton and Darlene Holloway. Clayton looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to be anywhere else. Darlene looked fascinated, her eyes bright with the particular gleam of someone watching a rival's humiliation. But dominating everything, the still center around which all this chaos revolved, was Constance. 73 years old, standing barely 5'4", maybe 130 pounds soaking wet. She wore the same clothes she'd been wearing in the garden, faded jeans, a blue work shirt with dirt on the sleeves, canvas sneakers with holes in the toes. Her gray hair was pulled back in a practical bun. She had no weapon, no shield, nothing but the absolute certainty of her convictions and the property deed that said this land belonged to her. Rainey walked up the drive. Every step felt like wading through deep water. The gravel crunched under her feet, absurdly loud in the tense silence. When she got within 10 feet of her mother, she stopped. "Mama." Constance's eyes were hard as flint. "Rainey, please move." "No." "Mama, the contract's signed, the financing's approved, these tractors are legally purchased. By you, not by me, and this is my land." Mike Sorensen called out from the truck. "Mrs. Sullivan, the younger Mrs. Sullivan, I got a delivery order here with this address. I got to complete my delivery or my company's in breach of contract." Rainey turned to him. "Just give me a minute, please." "Ma'am, I've been here 45 minutes already. I got 2 more deliveries today, and I'm already behind schedule. Please, just a minute." She turned back to her mother, tried to find words that would bridge the gap between them, would make Constance understand that this wasn't rebellion, wasn't rejection, was just a daughter trying to build something for herself and her family. "We need this equipment," Rainey said, hating how her voice shook. "The old tractors are 20 years old. They break down constantly. We're losing time, losing efficiency. The 410 runs fine. The 420 runs fine. You know why? Because I maintain them. Because I don't run them into the ground trying to prove something to people whose opinions don't matter. Their opinions do matter." Olivia came home from school crying because the other kids said we were poor. Something flickered across Constance's face. Pain, maybe, but her jaw stayed set. "So you're teaching your daughter that what other people think is more important than financial security, that pride is worth $85,000 in debt." "I'm teaching her that we don't have to settle for less, that we can have nice things, that appearances matter more than reality, because that's what you're really saying, Rainey. You're saying looking successful is more important than being secure." Rick Holloway chose this moment to insert himself into the conversation. He approached with his salesman's smile, hands spread in a gesture of reasonableness. Ladies, I think we can work this out. Mrs. Sullivan the elder. Mrs. Sullivan, I understand your concerns. Change is scary, especially when it comes to finances. But these tractors represent a sound investment in your farm's future. The efficiency gains alone will... Rick Holloway. Constance turned to him, and her voice could have cut glass. You sold my daughter $85,000 worth of debt. You did it knowing I'd never approve. You preyed on her insecurities and her desire to keep up with your sister-in-law's flashy lifestyle, and you did it all while smiling that snake oil salesman smile. So when I say I want you off my property, what I mean is get in your truck and drive away before I call Sheriff Morrison and have you removed for trespassing. Rick's smile faltered. Now, ma'am, there's no call for off my property. The silence that followed was broken by a sound that made everyone turn. Darlene Holloway was laughing. Not loud, not obnoxious, just a quiet chuckle that nonetheless carried across the distance. Constance's head swiveled toward Darlene like a gun turret acquiring a target. Something funny, Darlene. Darlene's smile was pure poison. Just thinking how typical this is. Rainey tries to step into the modern era and you slap her back down. Some things never change. Well, and you want to talk about modern era? Constance took 3 steps toward where Darlene stood. Let's talk about modern. How much do you owe on those John Deeres you're so proud of? Darlene's smile froze. That's private financial. $72,000, I know because Clayton came to me last month asking to borrow $12,000 to cover missed payments. I said no. Want to know why? Because lending money to someone who's already drowning doesn't save them. It just delays the inevitable. Clayton's face went red. He looked at the ground, at the sky, anywhere but at the people staring at him. That's a lie, Darlene said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Is it Fletcher Weber was at the bank last week? He saw the foreclosure notice on Wendell Thompson's farm. Asked the loan officer how many farms in Marshall County are currently behind on equipment payments. Want to guess the number? No one answered. 17. 17 farms in this county alone are struggling to make payments on equipment they bought in the last 3 years. Equipment they didn't need. Equipment they bought because people like Rick here convinced them that modern farming means maximum debt. And you know what happens when interest rates go up, when crop prices go down, when there's a drought or a flood or just one bad year? Still silence. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. The bank takes it all, the equipment, the land, everything. And I watched that happen once already. Constance's voice had gone quiet now, but it carried weight that loud words never could. 1932, I was 27 years old. I watched the bank auction off my father-in-law's farm because he owed $2,400 on a tractor he bought in 28. $2,400. They took 160 acres that had been in the family for 3 generations. They took it and sold it for pennies on the dollar, and my father-in-law never spoke another word until he died 5 years later. She turned back to Rainey. Your father died at 52 because of a truck payment, $120 a month. That's all it was. But it was $120 every month, whether we had it or not, whether times were good or bad, whether he was sick or well, and the stress of it killed him. Tears were streaming down Rainey's face now. Mama, I know the story, but this is different. It's not different. It's never different. Debt doesn't care about your circumstances. It doesn't care if you're tired or scared or struggling. It just sits there month after month, year after year, demanding its pound of flesh. The contract's signed, Rainey said desperately. I can't undo it. I put down $2,000 non-refundable deposit. If I cancel now, I lose that money anyway. Then you lose $2,000. Better than losing 85. Better than losing sleep every night for the next 10 years. Better than losing your health worrying about payments. Better than your children watching you die young like you watched your father. Garrett stepped forward, his voice tentative. Connie, what if we tried it 1 year? See how it goes. Constance looked at her son-in-law with something like pity. Garrett, I like you. I think you're a good man and a good husband and a good father. But you're young. You haven't lived through what I've lived through. You think 1 year of debt is a trial period. I'm telling you it's a trap. Once you're in, once you've made that first payment, it's easier to make the second and the third, and before you know it, you've spent 10 years paying interest to a bank that doesn't give a damn whether you live or die. Mike Sorensen dropped his cigarette and ground it out under his boot. Folks, I hate to interrupt this family discussion, but I need a decision. Do I unload these tractors or do I take them back to the dealership? Everyone looked at Constance. She looked at Rainey. It's your choice, Constance said quietly. I can't stop you from signing contracts, can't stop you from making decisions, but I can stop those tractors from coming onto my property. So here's what's going to happen. Mike is going to turn that truck around and drive back to Holloway Implement. And you, Rainey, you're going to decide what you want more, my approval or those tractors. You can rent storage somewhere else. You can find another place to keep them. But if you do that, you're choosing to farm without my support, without my guidance, without access to this land that I've spent 43 years keeping debt-free. You'd really do that. Rainey's voice was barely a whisper. You'd really cut me off. I'd really save you from yourself, even if you hate me for it. The standoff stretched on, 30 seconds, a minute. The sun was sinking lower now, painting the sky orange and pink behind the farmhouse. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang. Finally, Rick Holloway said, Rainey, you've got to make a call here. And Rainey, standing there on the gravel drive with her mother on one side and $85,000 worth of gleaming machinery on the other, with her husband watching and Darlene smirking and the whole disaster of the last 4 months pressing down on her like a physical weight, said the words that would define the next several years of her life. I need those tractors. Constance's face didn't change. She simply nodded one step to the side of the road and said, then you'll have to find somewhere else to put them, because they're not staying here. Rainey turned to Mike. Take them back to the dealership. I'll figure something out. Mike looked relieved. Yes, ma'am. Rick, you want to call your office and let them know? As Mike climbed into the cab and started the engine as the big truck began its awkward three-point turn on the narrow drive, Rainey looked at her mother one more time. I'll never forgive you for this. Constance met her eyes. I can live with that, long as you live, period. The truck rumbled back down the drive, the John Deere tractors still strapped to the trailer, never having touched the soil of Willow Creek Farm. Darlene and Clayton drove away. Rick Holloway drove away. Garrett stood there uncertainly until Rainey snapped, take the kids home. And he left too, which left Constance and Rainey standing 50 feet apart on a gravel drive with everything broken between them and no clear path to fixing it. Rainey got in the old Ford and drove away without another word. She would not speak to her mother for the next 7 months. Fletcher Weber owned 320 acres 2 miles down County Road 14. He was 61 years old, had been farming since before Constance was born, and he had a barn with unused space that he agreed to rent to Rainey for $200 a month. 3 days after the confrontation on a Friday afternoon, Mike Sorensen delivered the 2 John Deere tractors to Fletcher's barn. Rainey signed for them, wrote Fletcher a check for the first month's rent, and tried not to think about how she was now paying $200 a month just to store equipment that was supposed to be making her money. The 4440 was everything Rick had promised. Powerful, smooth, climate-controlled cab with a radio that picked up AM stations from Des Moines. When Rainey climbed into that seat for the first time, turned the key, and felt that turbocharged engine rumble to life, she felt a surge of something that might have been vindication. See, Mama. See what you were trying to keep me from. But vindication is a feeling. Monthly payments are a fact. And facts have a way of crushing feelings under their relentless weight. The first payment was due May 15th, $1,100. Rainey wrote the check at her kitchen table, her hands shaking slightly. She'd done the math 100 times. They could afford it. They absolutely could afford it, as long as nothing went wrong, as long as yields were good, as long as prices stayed stable, as long as no unexpected expenses came up, as long as. The planting season of 1978 started well enough. Rainey and Garrett worked the 640 acres with the new equipment, and there was no denying it was faster. The 4440 pulled a 12-row planter at speeds the old 410 could never match. They finished planting in 8 days compared to the 14 it had taken with the old equipment the year before. Darlene noticed? Of course Darlene noticed. She stopped by Fletcher's barn one morning in late May, ostensibly to borrow a tool, actually to get a close look at the new tractors. Well, you went through with it after all. Good for you, Rainey. Good for you. Thanks. How's your mama taking it? We're not talking. Shame, but sometimes you got to make hard choices, right? Sometimes you got to choose your own path, even when your parents don't approve. Darlene ran her hand along the hood of the 4440. These are beautiful machines, worth every penny, I bet. We'll see. Course storage and all must be eating into your profits. $200 a month, I heard, plus the payment. That's what, $1,300 a month just for equipment. 1,300. Wow, that's commitment. That's real commitment. Darlene smiled. But you'll make it work. You're smart. You'll figure it out. After Darlene left, Rainey sat in the barn with the new tractors and did math in her head. $1,300 a month times 12 months, $15,600 a year for 10 years. That was $156,000 total, not counting the deposit she'd already paid, not counting the interest that was stacking up, not counting the storage fees. For the first time, the reality of what she'd done felt less like opportunity and more like a trap slowly closing around her throat. June brought weather, not disaster weather, not drought or flood or tornado, just difficult weather, less rain than normal, temperatures slightly higher than average, the kind of conditions that stress crops just enough to matter. Rainey had followed the advice of Tom Patterson, an agronomist who worked on commission selling fertilizer and chemicals. Tom had recommended heavy nitrogen applications, premium herbicides, the full modern package of inputs. You've got the equipment now, he'd said. Might as well go all the way. Maximize your yields. What Tom hadn't mentioned, what he had no financial incentive to mention, was that heavy fertilizer applications in dry conditions could stress plants even further. That there was such a thing as too much of a good thing. By early July, it was clear that the corn wasn't looking quite right. The leaves had a yellowish tinge that Rainey didn't like. She called Tom, who came out, looked at the fields, and said, "Little nitrogen burn, nothing to worry about, just needs rain." But the rain didn't come. Not in July, not in early August, just enough precipitation to keep things alive, but not enough to help them thrive. Constance's corn, planted with the old equipment and fertilized conservatively the way she'd always done it, looked better. Not great, the dry weather was affecting everyone, but better. Less stressed, healthier. Rainey tried not to notice. Tried not to drive past her mother's fields and make comparisons. Failed. The second payment came due June 15th, $1,100. The third payment came due July 15th, another $1,100. Each check felt heavier than the last. And then in mid-August, the 4440's turbocharger failed. Rainey had been working a field at the far end of the property, trying to get some cultivation done before the weeds got completely out of control. It was 95 degrees, the cab air conditioning straining to keep up. She'd been running the tractor hard, trying to cover as much ground as possible before dark. When she finally shut it down, she shut it down fast. Didn't let it idle. Didn't give it time to cool. Just turned the key off and climbed out, tired and hot, and ready to be done for the day. That's when she heard the sound, a high-pitched whine that turned into a grinding noise that turned into silence. She knew before she even looked that something was seriously wrong. Garrett came out, looked at it, shook his head. Turbocharger. We need to take it to the dealer. They hauled the tractor to Holloway Implement on a flatbed the next day. Rick Holloway's smile wasn't quite as bright when he gave them the diagnosis. Turbocharger's shot. Looks like it wasn't allowed to cool down properly before shutdown. That causes oil coking in the bearings. It's operator error, I'm afraid. Not covered under warranty. How much to fix it? Rainey's voice was flat. Parts and labor, $3,200. Rainey felt the ground shift under her feet. $3,200. I can get you on the schedule next week. Should have you back up and running in 3-4 days. I don't have $3,200. Rick's smile got more sympathetic, which somehow made it worse. Well, we do offer financing on repairs. 12% APR minimum 6-month term. Monthly payment would be about $570. On top of the $1,100 I'm already paying you. Different loan, different payment schedule. But yes, effectively you'd be paying us $1,670 a month for the next 6 months, then back down to $1,100 after that. Rainey left the dealership and drove to the bank, asked about a short-term note. They approved her for $3,500 at 12% interest, 6-month repayment on the condition that she used the farm as collateral. She sat in the bank parking lot for 20 minutes looking at the loan papers, trying to decide if she was making a smart decision or digging herself deeper into a hole she'd never climb out of. The tractor needed to be fixed. The work needed to get done. What choice did she have? She signed the papers. That night, for the first time since April, since the confrontation in the driveway, Rainey cried. Not quiet tears, not dignified grief. Just sat on the edge of her bed and sobbed like something inside her was breaking that would never be whole again. Garrett held her and didn't say anything because what was there to say? I told you so. Your mother was right. We're in over our heads. All of those things were true, but saying them wouldn't help. Harvest came in October. Rainey had been projecting 115 bushels per acre when she'd done her initial calculations back in January. Modern equipment, modern inputs, modern techniques. 115 had seemed conservative. The actual yield was 96 bushels per acre. The math was brutal and unforgiving. 640 acres at 96 bushels per acre meant 61,440 bushels total. Corn prices had continued their slow drift downward through the fall, settling at $2.05 per bushel by the time Rainey sold. Gross revenue, $125,952. Operating costs, seed fertilizer, fuel chemicals, repair, storage had ballooned to $87,000. More than she'd planned. Way more. That left $38,952 before equipment payments. The equipment payments for the year, including the turbocharger repair loan, $17,800, which left $21,152 for the entire year. Rainey sat at her kitchen table with these numbers spread out in front of her on a cold November evening and tried to make them mean something different. Tried to find a math where this worked out okay, but numbers don't lie. And the numbers said she'd just spent a year working herself to exhaustion, operating $85,000 worth of modern equipment, farming 640 acres of prime Iowa farmland, and she'd netted about the same amount that someone working a factory job in Des Moines would make. Less actually when you factored in the hours worked. Meanwhile, Fletcher Weber, farming 320 acres with equipment older than Rainey's children, had netted $37,000. Half the land, double the profit. Constance's numbers, which Rainey heard about third hand through Reverend Pemberton, who'd heard them from someone at church, were even better. 400 acres under cultivation, she'd let some go fallow after Walter's death. Conservative inputs, old equipment, zero debt. Net income, $42,000. Two-thirds the land, double the profit. The lesson was clear, but Rainey wasn't ready to learn it yet. The phone call came on a gray Tuesday in mid-November. Constance's voice, the first time Rainey had heard it in 7 months. "Rainey, it's Mama. I think we should talk." The invitation to Thanksgiving dinner arrived a week later. Not just Rainey and Garrett and the kids, a family dinner, small, intimate, the kind where real conversations happen instead of the performative chatter of 40-person gatherings. Rainey almost said no. Pride suggested that showing up would be admitting defeat, but she was tired, so tired, and the prospect of one more month of this crushing weight, this constant stress, this gnawing fear that never quite went away, no matter how much she tried to ignore it, was finally more than she could bear. On Thanksgiving Day 1978, Rainey drove her family to Constance's farmhouse in the old Ford. The same truck that had started this whole mess, the same truck that Darlene had mocked at exactly 1 year ago to the day. Constance opened the door before they could knock, looked at her daughter, looked at her grandchildren, said, "Come in, turkey's almost done." They ate in near silence, at first the clatter of silverware on plates the only sound. Olivia and Beckett sensed the tension and kept quiet, eating their mashed potatoes with unusual focus. Garrett made a few attempts at small talk that died in the awkward air. Finally, after the dishes were cleared and the kids were sent to play in the living room, Constance poured coffee for herself, Rainey, and Garrett. "How'd you do this year?" Constance asked. Rainey stared into her cup. "Not great." "What did you net?" "About 21,000. Constance was quiet for a moment. "On 640, yes." "What do you owe?" "2,000 on the tractors, 3,000 on the repair. Storage fees, couple thousand more." Constance wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Outside the window, the November wind pushed against the farmhouse. Inside, the only sound was the tick of the kitchen clock. "I'm going to make you an offer," Constance said finally, "and I want you to really think about it before you answer." Rainey looked up. "I'll buy those tractors from you. I'll pay off both loans, the 82,000 and the repair note. Take full ownership. Sell them myself, take the loss on the depreciation. You and Garrett farm this land with my equipment. The old 410, the old 420. You keep what you make, pay no rent, build up your savings, and you learn what your father should have learned, that security beats status every single time." "Why?" Rainey's voice cracked. "Why would you do that after everything I said, after I didn't listen?" "Because you're my daughter, and I'd rather lose $10,000 than watch you lose yourself." Garrett spoke up, tentative. "Connie, that's incredibly generous. But we made this mess. We should be the ones to clean it up." "You can't clean that up," Constance said bluntly. "You're underwater and sinking. Another year like this one, maybe two, and you'll be in real trouble. I'm offering you a way out while you can still take it. Rainey felt tears building. Everyone will know. Everyone will know I failed. Everyone who matters already knows you're struggling. The ones who don't matter don't deserve your concern. Constance reached across the table, took her daughter's hand. Baby pride is expensive. Your father paid for it with his life. You don't have to make the same payment. The kitchen clock ticked. The wind rattled the windows. And Rainey Sullivan, 34 years old, made the hardest decision of her life. Okay, she whispered. Oh, okay. Constance wrote a check for $85,000 the following week, paid off both loans in full, took ownership of the tractors, and immediately listed them for sale. 6 months later, in May of 1979, she found a buyer in the next county, a farmer who was making the same mistake Rainey had almost made. The sale price was $74,500. Constance lost $10,500 on the transaction. Never mentioned it. Never held it over Rainey's head. Never said I told you so. The farming season of 1979 was different in every way that mattered. Rainey and Garrett worked Willow Creek's fields with the old equipment. The 1960 John Deere 4010 that Constance had been maintaining meticulously for nearly 20 years. The 1965 4020 that ran smooth as silk if you treated it right. The equipment was slow. The cab wasn't climate controlled. The radios didn't work. The paint was faded and the seats were patched, and sometimes when Rainey drove past Darlene's gleaming machinery, she felt that old familiar ache of inadequacy. But she slept at night. For the first time in 18 months, she slept through the night without waking at 3 a.m., with her heart racing and her mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. The 1979 season brought more drought. Yields across Marshall County were down, 92 bushels per acre for Rainey. Corn prices stayed depressed at $2.10. But operating costs without the heavy fertilizer bills and the repair payments and the storage fees were $48,000 instead of $87,000. And equipment payments were zero instead of $17,800. Net income $31,000. Not spectacular, but sustainable, survivable, real. Fletcher Weber netted $34,000 on his 320. Constance netted $38,000 on her 400 acres. The three debt-free farmers in Marshall County, working with old equipment and conservative inputs and careful management, all came through a difficult year with money in the bank. 17 other farms, the ones that had leveraged up, bought new equipment, maximized inputs on credit, struggled. 3 of them missed equipment payments, 1 declared bankruptcy. And sitting at home watching this unfold through the farming press and community gossip, Rainey began to understand what her mother had been trying to tell her all along. It wasn't about the equipment. It had never been about the equipment. It was about who controlled your future. When you owed money, the bank controlled your future. When you owed nothing, you did. The farm crisis that would reshape American agriculture began quietly in 1981. Interest rates that had been high started climbing toward catastrophic. The prime rate hit 20%. 20. Farmers who'd taken out operating loans at reasonable rates suddenly faced refinancing at rates that were simply unpayable. Corn prices, which had been soft, collapsed from $210 in 79 to $180 in 81. And farmland values, which had seemed like they would rise forever, started falling. Slowly at first, then faster. By 1983, the disaster was in full swing. Across Iowa, across the Midwest, across rural America, farms were failing at a rate not seen since the Great Depression. The auction notices appeared in newspapers like obituaries. Good people, hardworking people, people who'd done everything the agricultural establishment told them to do, losing everything. Darlene and Clayton Holloway held on longer than most. They refinanced, sold off equipment, took on additional debt trying to stay ahead of the payments. Clayton took a part-time job in town. Darlene stopped posting on social media, stopped wearing designer clothes, stopped driving past Willow Creek Farm with that superior smile. The foreclosure notice came in April of 1983. 90 days to bring the payments current or the bank would seize the property. They couldn't do it. Nobody could. The math simply didn't work anymore. On a warm May morning, well over 100 people gathered at the Marshall County Courthouse for the auction of the Holloway Farm, 480 acres that Clayton's grandfather had homesteaded in 1891. Equipment that was 5 years old and still gleaming. A house, a barn, a life's work. Opening bid $380,000 for everything. It sold for $294,000, less than the outstanding mortgage. The bank took a loss. Darlene and Clayton took a loss. Everyone lost except the man who bought it at auction, a corporate farm entity from Chicago that would consolidate it with other failed farms and run it as a factory operation. Rainey attended the auction. So did Constance. They stood in the back, watching Darlene cry as the auctioneer's voice counted down her family's legacy. Afterward, Rainey found Darlene sitting on the courthouse steps, mascara running down her face, looking 20 years older than she had at that Thanksgiving dinner 6 years ago when she'd mocked Rainey's old truck. "Darlene, I'm so sorry." Darlene looked up. Her eyes were red empty. "You were right. Your mama was right. We should have been like you. Should have stayed small, stayed careful. But I wanted to be somebody. Wanted people to look at us and think we were successful. You were somebody. You were a farmer. That's enough. It wasn't enough for me." Darlene wiped at her eyes. "And now it's all gone. Everything. We're moving to Des Moines. Clayton got a job at a factory. 42 years old, starting over like we're kids again." Rainey sat down next to her, two women who'd been rivals, who'd said cruel things, who'd measured themselves against each other and found only pain in the comparison. "I almost joined you," Rainey said quietly. "If my mama hadn't stopped those tractors that day, if she hadn't forced me to face what I was doing, I'd be sitting where you are right now." Darlene nodded, didn't say anything for a long time. "Then tell your mama I'm sorry for everything I said, for how I treated you both. Tell her she was right all along." 2 weeks later, the Holloways were gone. Their house was empty. The fields were being worked by contractors hired by the Chicago company. And Marshall County had 17 fewer family farms than it had started the decade with. But Willow Creek Farm endured. 640 acres paid in full, old equipment carefully maintained. A family that slept at night without fear of the mailman bringing disaster. Time moved on the way it does. Seasons turned, children grew. The farm crisis gradually eased as the farms that were going to fail had failed and the survivors adapted to the new reality. In 1985, Constance Sullivan, at age 80, decided it was time to slow down. She transferred the deed to Willow Creek Farm to Rainey in a ceremony at the county courthouse that included no speeches, no celebration, just a mother's signature transferring a legacy to her daughter. "Take care of it," Constance said simply, "and never ever let debt touch it." "I won't, Mama, I promise." Constance died 3 years later in winter, peacefully in her sleep at age 83. The funeral was held at Willow Creek Methodist, and they had to open the overflow room to accommodate everyone who came. Farmers from 3 counties, people she'd helped over the years. People whose farms had failed, who came to pay respects to the woman who'd shown them there was another way even though they'd learned too late. At the wake, Fletcher Weber said to Rainey, "Your mama saved a lot of people. Most of them never knew it, but she did." By 1990, the farm was thriving in a quiet, sustainable way. Rainey was 46. Olivia was 21, working in Des Moines, but talking about coming back to the farm. Beckett was 18, about to start at Iowa State. And in the barn sat a 1976 John Deere 4330 that Rainey had bought used in 1987 for $22,000. Cash. The same model line she'd tried to buy new a decade earlier, the same green and yellow paint, the same capabilities. But this one was paid for, and that made all the difference. The farm had grown to 800 acres. Now Rainey had bought the Wendell property when it went to auction in '84, paid cash from savings. The operation was debt-free, profitable, sustainable. Everything Constance had built, preserved, and expanded. On a spring evening in 2008, Rainey stood on the porch of the farmhouse, her farmhouse. Now the deed in her name, no mortgage, no liens, nothing but clear title, and watched the sun set over fields that had fed 4 generations of Sullivans. She was 64 years old. Retirement age, though she wasn't ready to retire yet. Olivia had come back to the farm after all had married, had a daughter of her own named Piper, 12 years old, and already showing interest in farming. That interest worried Rainey sometimes, because the world was still full of Rick Holloways, still full of Darlenes, still full of people who would tell you that new was better, and debt was just a tool, and if you weren't expanding, you were dying. And she needed to make sure that Piper learned the right lessons, the ones that mattered. The ones that would keep her safe when the world turned hard again, as it always eventually did. Piper came out onto the porch, sat down on the steps next to her grandmother. "Grandma, Mom says you used to have new tractors, big fancy ones. What happened to them?" And Rainey smiled, because this was it. This was her chance to pass down what Constance had died trying to teach her. "Let me tell you a story," Rainey said, "about your great-grandmother and a red truck and the best thing that ever happened to me." She told the whole story as the sun sank lower, painting the sky orange and pink. Told about Thanksgiving and Darlene and the dealership and the contract. Told about April 18th, 1978, when Constance stood in a gravel road and refused to move. Told about the years of struggle and the eventual redemption. Told it all, leaving nothing out. When she finished, Piper was quiet for a long time. Great-grandma must have been really brave, she said finally. The bravest woman I ever knew. Grandma, if I want a farm when I grow up, am I allowed to buy new equipment? Rainey laughed. Baby, when you grow up, you can buy whatever you want. Just make sure you can afford it without borrowing. Make sure you own it and it doesn't own you. Can you promise me that? Piper nodded solemnly. I promise. They sat together as the last light faded, as the first stars appeared, as the night sounds of the farm rose around them. And Rainey thought about Constance standing in that road 3 decades ago, thought about Walter dying young from the weight of a single payment, thought about all the farms that had failed and the few that had endured. 30 years. 30 years since the worst day of her life had turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to her. 30 years since she'd learned that love sometimes looks like cruelty, and wisdom sometimes looks like stubbornness, and the people who save you are sometimes the ones who refuse to give you what you want. 30 years ago, my mother stood in a gravel road and stopped $85,000 worth of tractors from destroying my life. At the time, I thought she was ruining everything. Turns out she was saving everything. If someone you love is trying to stop you from making a terrible financial decision, listen to them. Not because they're trying to control you, because they've lived long enough to know what you haven't learned yet. Debt doesn't care about your dreams. It only cares about its payments. My mother taught me that the hard way, and I'll spend the rest of my life grateful she had the courage to do it.